Friday morning, November 22nd. It's 8:45 and the weather is misty.
Part of making history come alive is to be willing to participate in history yourself. And I think that's what we did on November 22nd when we knew that the president was coming to Fort Worth.
Dr. Proctor gave us extra credit, and so that was what spurred us to get on that bus that morning and go down there it was drizzling rain, as I remember.
We knew he was supposed to come out, I want to say 9 to 9:30, but we were downtown at 6.
And when I saw him walk out of the hotel, I thought, oh, you know, he's coming my way. And sure enough, I got to shake hands with him, and I was just thrilled. I mean, I think there were actually tears in my eyes.
So we were all excited about him coming. In fact, one of my friends, Dr. Mary and Jack Brooks, was one of the few blacks that they allowed to even come to the breakfast. So he was here at the Hotel Texas, and they were really proud that he was in Fort Worth.
We looked at each other and said, well, we're here, let's stay. And so we went down the street to the Piccadilly and then came back outside and watched the motorcade go by. So we did get to see Jackie that morning.
I can certainly remember the day. It was a lot of excitement at Dunbar High School because our band had an opportunity to go downtown and play for them.
I was at Dunbar High School, and we were having fun out there because the band had just made it back, you know, and we were so, oh, things going on, because he was on our way to Dallas there.
And one of the members of that band was my neighbor, Alexander Howard. And I just can remember Alexander's holding up his hand and said, you know, this hand shook the hand of the President of the United States.
3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade.
And all at once the principal came on the loudspeaker and said, President Kennedy had been assassinated. He said, what?
We were in Coach Johnson's PE class and we were playing softball. I was on third base when everything came to a halt, and they brought us all inside into the building, and the announcement was made of what had happened in Dallas.
That was unreal. And I couldn't believe it, to tell you the truth. Who would kill the president who's coming here to help us?
I had been assigned to Arlington Heights High School as vice principal. I'm in the hall, and a fellow teacher, Joe Sherrod, comes down the hall and says, have you heard the president has been shot in Dallas? I was at Wedgwood Middle School. Several of us were in the lounge. We heard the news come that President Kennedy had been shot.
I remember as I walked into the government class, the news was breaking and we were all just devastated. I mean, people were just sitting there. I even have goosebumps right now from the sorrow and the shock, again, because we had just been there and how could this happen?
We had just been there and just had shaken hands with the man, with President Kennedy. And I was already crying from the excitement, and now I was crying from the, you know, the sorrow.
We repeat, it has just been announced that President Kennedy is dead.
My dad was a senior editor at the Star-Telegram. He knew LBJ, the vice president, and he and my mother were going to be with the group with President Kennedy on the day that he visited. So for several days prior to his arrival, I would hear my mom and dad talking about Kennedy coming, and they were excited about it. I was a student at Ridgely Hills Elementary School, and we were in the cafeteria when the principal, P.B. Stovall, came over the loudspeaker and said, President Kennedy and, quote, others reportedly have been shot. The first thing that came to mind for me was that others who were the others, because I knew that my dad and at some point my mom were somewhere around the president. So that was my first thought. And of course, they let out school. I walked home and found that my dad was okay and my mother was okay. And then it started to sink in that the President of the United States had been shot and killed.
The loss of President Kennedy affected the entire globe. It was not just a loss to the United States, but many countries abroad.
It's very clear in my mind. I remember it was a dark day for Europe also. It's a sad day in history.
I thought it appropriate, and I kind of exercised the prerogative and thought, since there's a lot of rumor going on, I'd announce what had happened, and did. And it rather calmed things, I think, and the horrendous nature of that event was such that, of course, we all were stunned by it. You know, it couldn't happen. That was November 22nd morning for me. That Friday afternoon, before we left to go home, I recall two men came in the office, identified themselves as FBI agents, and said, "We would like everything you have on Lee Harvey Oswald," whom I'd never heard of before. I didn't know at the time that Oswald had ever attended that school.
When it happened and I heard his name, it kind of rang a bell, and I thought, now where have I heard that name before? Of course, he didn't go by the Harvey in the elementary school, it was just Lee Oswald.
I, of course, was at home. School was out. My dad was at work, and the phone rang. And I answered it, and it was Lee Harvey Oswald's mother. And she simply said, "I need to speak to your father. My son has been arrested for killing the president." In my memory, I remember being shocked by it, but I just quickly told her, I said, I'll give you the phone number to the newspaper. My dad is at work. It's my understanding, after she got off the phone with me, she called the Star-Telegram, and the call was apparently taken by Bob Schieffer, who now is a legend in journalism, and he was a young police beat reporter at the Star-Telegram. He took the call and arranged to drive Mrs. Oswald to Dallas to try to get more information about what's happened to her son, what the charges are. That was a big development, certainly for him as a young journalist covering the cop shop in Fort Worth.
I didn't really make the connection originally. And then in the early part of 1964, Life magazine put out an article about him. And there was a picture in that article, showing the Ridgely West School and the schoolyard, the playground, and talked about Ridgely West. And then it hit me who he was. And I still have the memory of the picture in my mind of what he looked like at that time. He was a sixth grader. I can still visualize him sitting in the back row, what he looked like. He always wore a white t-shirt.
The Monday after that fateful Friday, and I remember I thought, well, I'll read the paper and see what accounts there are of the fateful event. And the attendant says, "Well, we don't have any papers." Said, "Marguerite Oswald has come by and bought up all we had."
I think with the 50-year anniversary, there are going to be some wounds that are going to open up. People are going to remember. I remember. It's more vivid in my mind than it has been for years, and that's because of this mark, this 50th anniversary mark.
We knew he was the 35th President of the United States, and that he was a young president compared to the other presidents who had been there before him.
Mr. Kennedy was a rising star as a president. People just seemed to like and love him, and he was on a trip to improve the country in every way.
He was I call the forerunner of our civil rights legislation. He was for everybody, not just blacks now. And one time he said that we need to be sure that the people who work in this government, that we all have the same relationship, that we all treated equally.
The personal loss that I felt was actually losing someone that I thought was even though I never met him, that I felt like was someone who was looking out for my best interest.
The big news was obviously the fact that with Kennedy there was an opening toward the civil rights movement and an opening toward the more accepting of diversity.
I thought he was one that was trying to bring out the best in America. And by bringing out and looking at America as a whole, he was bringing out the best in each and every individual that we have in this country. When you lose a president that has the ideas and so much promise for this country, it does have a profound effect on you that lasts you your entire life. And yeah, you always wonder, where would we be now if we hadn't lost him so soon? But I can say this, though, I think it really galvanized some of the efforts in this country to continue to move forward with some of the things he wanted in place.
When he was killed, then that made the whole country come together, and people forgot some of the things they disliked. So I think his legacy was that the Congress did pass the Civil Rights Act and the Civil Rights Voting Act.
But at the same time, I don't think that all of the hopes and dreams and aspirations that were for this entire country really came true because of the loss. I think with his leadership and the promise of his leadership could have changed this country really for the better.
I've heard it said that the country grew up that weekend. That changed the course of history of the United States.